This morning we intend to remember our friends with love and gratitude, and we intend to make beautiful music in their memory together. But first I invite up Lindsay Elliott for a reading of Bright Mary.
Had I known that you were going, I could have given you at least good speed. But you slipped away so suddenly that I was left standing on the shore, watching into space, not knowing that you would never come back till I felt the waters of the incoming tide cold about my heart. I do not ask for you again. I know the sea you sail does not touch these shores. I only look for a distant all hail, like the white crest of a wave against the horizon, or a signal light flashing once far against the sky. Sail on, my bright sturdy mariner. Let out a full sheet to your new winds. Taste the clear spray of your new waters. You were made for flight and swiftness and eternal freedom. Nothing shall weigh you down or call you back to the warm earth or the shape we knew, or the place that held you so very dear. I have cut the anchor chain that bound you to me, and the great strength of my love, and the heavy ache of my loneliness, which bear upon you and hold you back. I have fashioned into a shining silken fabric to be the highest and strongest of your new sails.
I'll now read aloud the names printed in your program of the Doox who have died since our last reunion in 2018, with a caveat that this list potentially is not exhaustive and our records, as always, are incomplete, so we apologize if any names have been incidentally left off of this list. We will have a time of silence for those names that we lift up in our hearts, those names that are printed, and other names who are sorrowfully missing this morning. Ed Scheibler, class of 54. Howard Park, class of 55. Gib Durfee, class of 56. Linus Travers, class of 58. Carl Kasel, class of 62. Dave Budding, class of 63. Michael Emery Smith, class of 69. Wayne Dodge, class of 72. Rob Gavrell, class of 98. I'll have a moment of sharing reflections, remembrances of our friends in no particular order. There have been some who have been invited forward this morning to speak on behalf of particular Doox. I'd first invite forward Ted Turk to speak in memory of Wayne Dodge.
Wayne passed away in September of 2021 at the age of 71 from complications of paraplegia due to a tragic fall down steps. We sang together as my first semester in the Doox and his last semester before he became a Whiffen Doox. And even in those few months, I found him to be patient with me as well as wise, and I still remember that he had a smooth, deep baritone voice and abundant facial hair. Professionally, he became a family doctor with a public health specialty. He was also certified in geriatrics and in HIV care, and he led a major medical team's response to the AIDS epidemic. After retirement, he volunteered for the End of Life Washington group and taught mindful living and self-compassion practices at The Haven, which is a retreat center in Canada. He was a voracious reader, and he had a home library that was large enough that it could have become a branch of the Seattle Public Library. He was also an avid gardener and especially loved Japanese maple trees. The people he touched in his life described him using words such as compassionate, caring, kind, scholarly, a gentleman, a gift. He was very close with his older sister, Marie Eaton, an accomplished polymath herself. She said, although he was 4 years younger, he was often the one I called when I needed to puzzle through some problem. About 4 months ago, I was watching the TV program CBS Sunday Morning and heard his name as the subject of a segment following his death. Instead of being cremated or buried, he directed that after he died, his body should undergo composting by the first human composting funeral home in the US. After this procedure, his remains, which are now indistinguishable from soil, were returned to his sister, who spread them in the garden he loved, and which nurtured a Japanese maple tree she planted in his memory, keeping his family connection intact. In addition to his sister and brother, he is also survived by his husband of 39 years, his daughter, her husband, and 2 granddaughters.
I'll invite forward Tom Bullitt to speak on behalf of Carl Casey.
I've asked my friend, Dr. Professor Charles Balin, to join me because he has something to add to Carl's story. Carl is one of the 3 most important music directors in the first 2 decades of the group. Walt Ferrier, who is still with us, lives in Seattle and doesn't get back east much, but he arranged all the first songs that the group sang, like Istanbul and When I See All the Love in the Raised on Babies, and I Cannot Wash My Eye Without an Eye Cup. Lots of silly stuff. It was something that Walt was particularly good at. You've all met Fritz this weekend, who came along in the middle of the 50s and dramatically expanded the repertoire to include a lot of classic jazz, some of which still gets sung today. Carl came along in 1962 and arranged, among others, the Take Me Along that we sang at the last reunion, and Wee Small Hours of the Morning, which got sung well into the 90s, may have been sung even in the last couple of decades. So he was an accomplished musician. He was also a very well-known, and perhaps one of the best well-known scholars of the American educational system. He wrote several books, taught at the University of Wisconsin, taught at Brown, taught at Harvard. So for him, music was just an avocation. It was just something he did for fun. And he did it so gentlemanly and kindly and wisely that the rest of us always felt just lucky to be around him. You would never have known that he was as accomplished a person as he was, because he always made everybody feel welcome. And among the things that I thought was wonderful about him was when was it the 55th or the 60th, Charles, when we did the first quartet? 55th.
We did it 3 times.
We, four pitch pipes from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. That would be me and Charles and Carl and Jeff Freeman created the Black Hole Quartet. And we sang, named after Charlie because he's an astronomer. And a joke about the famous Whiffenpoof Silver Dollar Quartet. I thought Black Hole was a kind of better name. And we sang at the opening of every reunion up until this one. And we sang at one mini reunion that was held in New York City. Now, Carl lived in Providence. He took the train down just to sing that song, and then took the train back that night. That's the kind of generous person that he was. He also had a significant impact on Charles' career in the Doox.
So, Carl influenced my life in 3 completely different moments. When he left Yale, he went to Harvard to study history, and his doctoral dissertation advisor was my father. And apparently, according to Carl, I met Carl for the first time when I was 3 years old. He continued to be a presence in our home until I was about 10. I don't specifically remember him. I remember him as one of the many eager young people who were so kind to us children. But he remembered me. And then years later, when I was an undergraduate, as some of you may possibly recall, my father was not 100% on board with the time and effort I was spending on the Doox Men. But he was not aware that Carl had a relationship with the Doox Men until Carl told him so. And knowing that someone as distinguished as Carl had previously held the position of pitch pipe of the Doox Men went some ways to reconciling him towards my activities, and I am deeply grateful to Carl's intervention. And then, as Tom mentioned, we sang together on a number of occasions later on, and I have to say that at the dinner last night, I think one of those times we sang at the dinner, not at the beginning. At the dinner last night, I greatly missed his presence, not merely because we didn't have an opportunity to sing this nice song together, but also I missed his wit and his charm and his erudition, all of which he had in abundance.
There we go. I'll now invite forward Isaac to speak on behalf of Linus Travers and Rob McGraw.
Good morning. I'm much more of a bass than I normally am, which I think Linus in particular would have appreciated. Jeff Freeman was actually originally asked to speak about Linus this morning, and unfortunately lost his voice even more than I did. So I've been asked to step in last minute, which is a great honor. But the irony is that I didn't prepare anything, and if you know Linus at all, you know that he was an effortless master of words. So for me to not to have any words is rather embarrassing. That being said, what I would like to sort of share with you is pieces of a tribute that I wrote when Linus passed, which I think encapsulates a lot of my personal feelings. And my apologies to the Travers family who are here that I don't have a lot of the biographical things right at the tip of my tongue, because again, I was not prepared for this. But I actually met Linus my freshman year. We talked a little bit last night about, or yesterday afternoon, about how the chase has been part of Belt that has remained fairly consistent over the years and very structured. And my particular year, there was a very short but very important addition to the chase, in that the chase happened to fall on the weekend of Mixed Company's Snowdrop. And Linus and Margaret's daughter, Julia, was a member of the group, as was their son, Jonathan. And so Linus was in town for Snowdrop. And so there was a moment that was added to the chase where the babies were told to stand under the arch of Phelps Gate. And this very distinguished, to us much older gentleman was there waiting for us. And so we got to sing a song with Linus Travers as part of our chase under the acoustics of Phelps Gate. And interestingly enough, at that time, I didn't really know Julia particularly well, so I was kind of friends in a way with Linus before I became lifelong friends with Julia. For those sort of who don't know the story, I think most do, but Linus was a freshman in the Doox Men when the first class were seniors, so he was there sort of at the very beginning of the whole thing, class of '58 as mentioned before. some of my fondest memories of spending time with Linus on this campus are stories of those days. He would regale us with stories of the early days, most of which I can't tell because his wife's sitting here, although she probably knows them now anyway. But I and everyone else just sort of gobbled them up because, again, Linus was just sort of a consummate storyteller, and it really was wonderful as a young person in the group to really appreciate sort of where we came from, and Linus was in many ways my personal historian of the Dooxman experience. I mentioned earlier sort of Linus's way with words, and you know what I learned over the years in sort of studying his masterful use of language was what I think is an important secret, and I've tried to use it in my own life, which is basically to tell everything with truth and tell everything with heart, because that was the center of everything that he did. Over the years, we were very fortunate. I was very fortunate to share many musical experiences with both the Dooxman and the Whiffenpoofs with Linus. At various times, we both served on alumnus boards for both organizations, and were part of countless reunions and concerts as part of all of that. Most times when I ended up at an event like we had last night, I did not actually end up singing in the shoe with people from my era. I sang in the shoe with Linus. And so I really missed that part last night. But I think what's more special to me beyond all of those Yale experiences is the fact that I got to spend a lot of time with Linus outside of these walls and outside of this campus. We were able to spend time away at various weddings, family gatherings. I have very fond memories of the amazing breakfast he would make for us in his house when we would be visiting in Milton. Linus passed away in November of 2020, almost 3 years ago now, very soon after my son was born. And so I found myself even sort of in Linus's illness kind of turning to him and trying to figure out how to be a relevant older dad, because he always remained so relevant. I didn't really get to talk to him about that very much because of the timing. But again, I think that probably would have something to do with truth and heart and about making people feel really special because you really believe that they are. So I described him as my role model, my brother in song, my mentor, my dear friend. And Julia actually called me to tell me that her dad passed. It was a Saturday afternoon, I believe I got the call. I was taking a much-needed nap at the time. I didn't tell you this, but my son was not sleeping pretty good. I was about a month old. And what that made me think about immediately was the fact that I was singing a lot of lullabies at that time. And one of my other really fond memories of Linus, and again sort of speaks to the idea of how much his influence was on me, is that we were both part of Allison Henning's memorial service at Patel Chapel. And I sang next to Linus as part of that. And so that night, I sang a lullaby, not really a lullaby, but I treated it as a lullaby, to my son that we had sung that day for Allison. Sleep, my love, and peace attend thee all through the night. Guardian angels, God will send thee all through the night. Soft the drowsy hours creeping, hill and dale in slumber sleeping. I my loved ones watch and keeping all through the night. So now for the one I did prepare. When news broke in September of 2021 that Rob Gavrell had passed away suddenly, we were obviously all in a state of shock and somewhat devastated. As that horrible week progressed and we learned more of the details of Rob's passing, those of us who knew him, I think, were somewhat comforted because Rob died very much in the way that he lived. Rob was killed in a freak motorcycle accident on a perfect autumn summer afternoon in his beloved Rocky Mountains of Colorado. And if you spend any time at all with Rob, you know that he was a bit of a daredevil. He was a thrill seeker. He was always looking for that next rush. And so it was not surprising to us that Rob sort of literally went out in a blaze of glory. But if you're lucky enough to spend any time beyond that with him, as some of us in this room were, you realize that that description was also paired exquisitely with a really keen intellect, with a steel trap memory, and with attention to detail and a dedication which made so many people in his life feel as if they were one of his best friends. And I know that to be true because I was lucky enough to be one of them. Robert Carl Sean Gavrel, I know his confirmation name because he insisted on putting all 4 initials on the whiff crest at Maurice. He was born September of 1975 in California, and soon thereafter adopted by his parents, George and Elaine. A couple of years later, he was joined by his sister Allison. That created their nuclear family. For those of you who know him, you probably wouldn't be surprised that he was described as a very active child. By the time he got to high school, he was an Eagle Scout. He attended the prestigious Head Royce School in Oakland, California, where he rode crew as well as sang. And those are both pursuits he actually continued here at Yale, and was one of the few people that managed an a cappella lifestyle with a competitive sports lifestyle. He was a very active member of this group. He and I served as co-tour managers our sophomore year for this group's second tour to the Virgin Islands. And he came back for every single reunion as part of this group. In fact, the last time that I was actually able to spend time with him was in this room 5 years ago. I think if you asked people for sort of a superstar list of musicians in the Doox Men, I'm not sure Rob would make that list, which I think is super unfortunate. He was actually a remarkably talented jazz singer. And indeed, when we produced our album my junior year, Rob had 2 tracks on it, both of which demonstrated his amazing facility, particularly with scatting, and both of which were, I think, very tellingly live tracks. A, because they were flawless, and B, because Rob didn't like to be put in any kind of box, including the box of a recording studio, so live would have to do. When Rob left Yale, he sort of continued to blaze his own trail. He had a very interesting career trajectory. He started off as a forest ranger for the National Park Service. Eventually ended up in Colorado, decided to go to law school. That's where he met his wife, Stacy. They eventually had 2 beautiful girls, Emma and Jocelyn. And Rob actually became a very successful attorney in Colorado. He was a civil litigation attorney, and I actually, as a side note, had a really interesting experience a few years ago where I got to work with him professionally. He hired me as an expert witness in a malpractice case that he was trying. And I couldn't help but sort of smirk to myself when we were in the courtroom, because Rob was amazing in that role. But all I could sort of remember, and those of you who spent time with him on campus will remember this, just all I could remember was the way that he would enter rehearsals or meetings, and Rob was very tall and very muscular and very lanky, and he would create this sort of just like cyclone of energy that would take out everything in its path and like control chaos. And that actually is what granted him his Dooxman nickname, which was Marmaduke. For those of you who are familiar with the dog, because it was a very descriptive way of looking at Rob. When I was asked to speak today, I was obviously very flattered by that, as I had also been flattered to actually sing at his funeral. But I had a really hard time because I was like trying to come up with the quintessential story. What anecdote can I tell you? How do I capture the essence that was Rob? And I can't. And I think that's the point. I also think it's how Rob would want it. No definitions, just music, just laughter, just love. So I just want to say that we miss you, Bobby G. We love you. You will always be a member of this family. And we are extremely grateful for all of it.
If there are any others, whether listed or otherwise, that anyone would like to speak to?
Good morning. I'm Richard Slade, and I am here to call in the energy of someone who was not in the Doox men, the Doox, who gave something to the Doox. Her name was Nancy Lee, class of '81, and in the slideshow yesterday, there were many informal pictures, but there were also many, publicity shots of the group, and there was a caricature poster that was drawn the fall of Tom Bullitt's pitch pipe year that was our advertising material for the entire year, and it was drawn by my friend Nancy. She was a high school senior whom I gave a tour to when I was a freshman, and we hit it off. I have this vivid memory of sitting on the old campus on a warm spring day in the grass talking to her, and we corresponded all summer, and she came to Yale in the fall, and then things got a little strange because I was a closeted gay man and she was a girl, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. And if I had been out at the time, yesterday's panel discussion about the early 2000s really touched a nerve. If I had been different, our friendship might have worked a different way instead of being its complicated thing that it was. But almost the first thing I did when she arrived at Yale was bring her to see the Doox. And she came to a whole bunch of concerts, and she drew that caricature, which is mostly us performing Istanbul with a couple of with Lionel in the middle doing Red Heart dog food, but it's all of us, and it's this gift that she gave the group. And she moved to Seattle, and she became a professional cartoonist and caricature artist for a newspaper there. And I found her on Facebook a little over 10 years ago, and we connected, and we corresponded, and she had ovarian cancer. She had for 10 years. That's a lot of different chemos. She did really well, but she died a week ago. And as I brought her to the group, I feel responsible for honoring her in this container right here, right now, because she gave us something, and I want to honor her for that.
Hear now these words attributed to Augustine of Hippo. There are days when the burdens we carry are heavy on our shoulders and weigh us down. When the road seems dreary and endless, the skies gray and threatening, when our lives have no music in them and our hearts are lonely and our souls have lost their courage. Flood the path with light. Turn our eyes to where the skies are full of promise. Tune our hearts to brave music. Give us a sense of comradeship with heroes and saints of every age. And so quicken our spirits that we may be able to encourage the souls of all who journey with us on the road of life. It seems very appropriate that we hold this service of remembrance in November. The first week in November is particularly relevant as in the Christian tradition, the 1st of November is marked as All Saints' Day. In Mexican culture, the 2nd or sometimes the 1st of November is marked as Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead. The end of the month, the 20th of November, for the past several years has been marked as a Transgender Day of Remembrance. So we often gather in the month of November in memory, gratitude, and love, even amidst sorrow and a sense of loss. We also, of course, mark every November the day of Thanksgiving, We offer gratitude for all that we have, all that we have held at one point, all that has come our way, all the gifts of lives and love, of light, the gift of song. So even in these days of sorrow, as dreary skies give way to light, as our paths are flooded with light, as we look with hope to new days and new tomorrows, even in the midst of warfare and violence and sorrow of all kind. Our world, of course, in these days, full of much sorrow and sadness. It is almost an act of resistance to lift our voices together in song, to join together in solidarity today, to make music together, to gather our hearts to make brave music, as Augustine says, to rejoice, to remember, and to be grateful. May we all be so grateful for the lives we have lifted up this morning, for the lives and memories that we carry in our hearts this day. And may we continue to be grateful for the gift of music that binds us together, with Doox of past, Doox present, and even Doox to come. Now invite forward Nathan Reef to lead us in our community song. There is music in your program. We'll sing Ave Maria. And Nathan.
Angelus Domini, nunceavit Mariae, et concepit de Spiritu Sancto.
Maria Dixi.
O God, before whom all generations rise and pass away, we praise you and give you thanks for all your children who, having lived this life on earth, now live eternally with you. Especially, we thank you for our dearly departed Doox this day. For Ed, for Howard, for Gib, for Linus, for Carl, for Dave, Michael, Wayne, and Rob. We give you thanks for the gift of their lives and for all in them that was good and kind and loving, for the grace you gave them, and the love of music and the gift of music that you kindled in them. Oh God, your love cares for us in life and watches over us in death. In our sorrow, enable us to commit ourselves and those we love to the world you care for. In our perplexity, help us to trust where we cannot understand. In our loneliness, may we remember our dearly loved Doox, trusting them to your keeping until eternal morning breaks and we all gather on another shore to make music together. Amen. Many of you may be familiar with the tradition of passing the peace. I invite you now, as we go forth and transition to our Doox Alumni Association meeting, to greet one another with a word of peace, whether a handshake, a hug, however you may feel so led. And often with these words, peace be with you, and you may respond with, and also with you. So peace, friends, peace be with you. Share a sign of peace with one another.